There is something about them. Maybe it's the hypnotic circular motion. Maybe it's the finely crafted horses and shining ornaments. Or perhaps simply, it's that they invoke pleasant memories of childhood innocence and play. Call them a carousel, or colloquially a merry-go-round. Their presence today is still vast at amusement parks, malls, and other community gathering places. But often decrepit and falling apart, their prominence in society is not what it once was. Indeed, about a century ago, these centripetal machines were all the rage, combining some of the era's most impressive artistic craftwork with childhood imagination. This video will dive into the history of where carousels came from, why they became so popular, particularly around the turn of the 20th century, and lastly, as the decades go by since the Golden Age, and they become older and less common, what are their prospects for the future? Fascination with circular motion goes back perhaps to the dawn of humanity, and it is likely rudimentary centripetal devices have existed for many years. For example, in the 6th century Byzantine Empire, rides were made from baskets that would carry the riders, tied to a centered pole. Perhaps the carousel's real genesis, though, occurred in the 12th century, as Arabian horsemen started practicing cavalry drills, where they would ride in circles, spear rings, and simulate combat. This practice would quickly spread across Europe into other parts of the globe. In several countries, this game became known as the Little War, and in French was pronounced carousel. By the 16th and 17th centuries, the practice lost its military purpose, but remained popular as they became part of equestrian tournaments, series of ritualistic games performed in European royal courts, where nobles rode in elaborate circles, tossing balls, spearing rings, and showing off horsemanship. These public spectacles were a way for the royalty to demonstrate their wealth and power. Famously, for example, King Louis XIV of France in June 1662 had a grand performance in the Tuileries Palace courtyard to celebrate the birth of his heir apparent and son. The site of the event is next to the Louvre and is still known today as the Place du Carrousel. The horses of noblemen participating would unfortunately be overworked by the tournaments, and people wanted a way to practice. And in the late 17th century, mechanical machines started to develop to simulate circular ring jousting, becoming what many would consider to be the first true carousels, spun by a workhorse, human, hand crank, or other animal walking around the perimeter of the machine. These early carousels didn't have platforms, and the crafted wooden horses were suspended from a chain and connected to a wheel connected to a central pole. Since these machines did not require expert horsemanship, they became more recreational and accessible to the general public. Riders often grabbed rings still, or tossed balls as part of the experience as well. Of course, with no base yet, this was still quite dangerous, and it wasn't uncommon for riders to fly outward. But nonetheless, these contraptions spread across the continent, and by the early 18th century became safer, and started to appear at public fairs that would tour across Europe. As the world industrialized in the 19th century, platforms were added to these carousels, allowing for more elaborate motion. But it was still missing one key ingredient: power. In 1861, Thomas Bradshaw of England would solve this issue, creating the first steam-powered carousel. Indeed, without the need for cumbersome ways to spin the machine, these steam-powered carousels started to become very popular. Many of these late 19th century carousels were built by engineer Frederick Savage, as he started experimenting with alternatives to horse figures, such as boats to give a different feeling that you are at sea, calling this ride Sea on Land. In the 1880s, he added crankshafts and gears that made the horses gallop up and down realistically. Built-in organs would also start to be added to these late 19th century carousels to create music during the ride. And of course, as an ode to its tournament game roots, participants were often encouraged to toss a brass ring from a dispenser at a target to try to win a prize. At this time, with mass migration to cities and a growing leisure market, carousels started to boom across the world, starting in the 1890s, what many consider to be the golden age of carousels. Indeed, as the industry expanded, the carousels were no longer only designed for transportation by a touring fair, and started to become more permanent attractions, allowing for larger and more intricate designs. In this era, carousels were created by skilled craftsmen, who often hand-carved artful horses, lions, giraffes, and other entities, often including gold leaves, glass jewels, and detailed saddles. These carousels would become staples of the childhood and family entertainment experience at the fastly growing amusement parks and other community centers developing at this time. And three distinct styles emerged. First was the Coney Island style, featuring faux jeweled saddles and mirrors to reflect and catch lights. Designed by Charles I.D. Luff, a prolific carousel designer of the time, the B&B Carousel at Coney Island, which amongst restorations is still active today and landmarked, is a crown jewel example of this opulent style that Luff and others would popularize during this time. Second is the Philadelphia style. Designed by carousel craftsman Gustav Denstill, features more realistic painted saddles and a relatively rugged design. Third, the county fair style would try to invoke more of a medieval look, harping back to the ride's roots in cavalry gaming. These carousels remained popular and were built at a rapid pace up until the Great Depression began in 1929. Production would suddenly ground to a halt, and people lost the capacity to spend as much time doing leisure activities. As a result, many carousels went out of business or started to get decrepit and old, and the once popular activity became less and less a part of the changing culture as society shifted towards more serious times ahead. Further, once a prideful feature of many amusement parks, carousels became less and less eye-catching, as larger and more elaborate roller coasters had been created and continued to grow in popularity after World War II. New carousels that were made were no longer handcrafted wooden spectacles, and were often made instead with aluminum and other cheap materials. The golden age of carousels was unfortunately an era of the past. With this being said, carousels have not gone extinct, and still some excellent carousels have been made in more recent times. For example, the house on the Rock Carousel in Spring Green, Wisconsin, built in 1981, is one of the most elaborate carousels ever created, featuring more than 20,000 lights, 182 chandeliers, and 269 hand-carved animals, riding below hundreds of hanging angels. Many old carousels have been restored as well in recent years, including Jane's Carousel in Brooklyn, New York, the Santa Monica Pier Carousel, and the Santa Cruz Luff Carousel. Even the Flying Horses Carousel in Martha's Vineyard, the first platform carousel built in the US in 1876, has been restored and is a popular tourist attraction. But as exciting as this restoration movement has been, of a projected 3,500 wood handcrafted carousels built during the golden era from the 1890s to the Great Depression, only 150 remain, and of those only a fraction are operational. When we do come by carousels today, riding one feels like more of an ode to the past than a relevant part of contemporary culture. With the many other centripetal things that humans have gone on to admire and partake in since the golden age of carousels, perhaps the ride's appeal is just dated, and the prospect of any sort of comeback feels far-fetched. But looking back at the cavalry games which started this carousel phenomenon, and its evolution up until the 20th century, there might be reason to believe that as society progresses, a new centripetal spectacle might dawn on us soon, like the carousels did so vibrantly in the past. Thank you so much for watching. Consider subscribing, and check out another video.